Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. Today I have a guest, Marc Friedman. Marc, as some of you know who follow Substack, is a regular writer and contributor there. And Marc and I have had a dialogue over the course of the past couple of months, and we decided it would be fun to make this a feature of the America's Fractured Politics podcast, where a couple times a month we get together and talk about the issues of the day and talk about general issues that we know are of concern to readers and listeners, and just kind of go through informally and ask each other questions and just try to kind of get to some answers and hopefully some constructive suggestions. So with that, let me introduce Marc.
Hi, Marc. First, let me say I am beyond delighted to be here with you today. I follow your writings on Substack very, very closely, and I have enormous respect for you and very much look forward to doing these podcasts with you.
Feeling is very much mutual. One of the things I wanted to get to was one of the things we were talking about recently, which was Trump's violation of the Constitution in so many novel ways. Talk a little bit about that. You've come up with some pretty good, a pretty good compendium of the ways in which he's done that. Talk about a few of them, just so that our listeners can get a sense.
There are many ways in which Trump has violated the Constitution. And of course, as we know, from month to month, if not from week to week, the ways in which he's attempting to do this are expanding. But there are a few that jump out at me as being good examples of how he's trying to bend, twist, evade, avoid the Constitution. First of all, we have the birthright cases where he has issued an executive order which would basically deny birthright citizenship to many who have been born here, but where one or both parents may not be here lawfully. 3 appellate courts have held that that executive order is unconstitutional. The case is now before the U.S. Supreme Court, and hopefully the Supreme Court will follow what the lower courts have done. That's one way. Another way would be targeting non-citizens for expressing pro-Palestinian beliefs through their speech. I think we would agree, Marc, that that speech is protected by the First Amendment. And Trump has tried every which way to close down the ability of non-citizens who are protected by the First Amendment to be able to speak on issues involving Israel, Palestine, Gaza, and so forth. That's another way the Constitution has been breached. As another way, there have been executive orders issued against major law firms. Many of those firms have capitulated and reached agreements with the Trump administration, which I personally abhor, having been a lawyer for 5 decades, including with the largest law firm in the world. 4 law firms have resisted. 4 law firms have filed lawsuits for an injunction against the executive order. Those 4 law firms have won their cases. That's yet another way in which Trump is trying to defile the Constitution. And in fact, one more way is the actions that he's taken against Harvard University by withholding funding and challenging ways in which they admit students, hire professors, and so forth. Harvard filed a lawsuit, and a federal judge there ruled that Trump's actions were unconstitutional and that an injunction would issue. So those are some. You can see that he's violated the Constitution, Mark, in actions against immigrants, universities, law firms, transgendered persons, cities like Portland, Chicago, Los Angeles, the environment, environmental protections. He's attempting to run roughshod over the Constitution in more ways than we have time to discuss here.
So how do we fix it?
Well, there are no guarantees, Mark, but I think there are three ways to look at how those actions can be resisted. First and foremost, in my mind, are the federal courts. As I've just explained, in these actions that we've talked about, at least the lower courts, the federal trial court and the intermediate appellate court, have almost time and time again enjoined Trump from the unconstitutional and unlawful conduct. So I think the first way these actions can be resisted is through our federal courts, though, to be honest, I don't have full confidence that this Supreme Court is going to apply the law as I believe it has been written. So that's one way, Mark. Another way, which is not working, is through Congress to assert its Article 1 authority. And we know that it has refused to do so because, at least through today and through November of 2026, Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, is controlled by the Republicans. And they seem unwilling or unable to resist what it is Trump is doing and to show respect for the Constitution, the separation of powers doctrine, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and so forth. So we have the courts, which may or may not work. We have Congress, which is not working, though that hopefully will change in November of 2026. And then we have a third level of resistance, Mark, and those are individual actions. And there are a whole host of individual actions that can be taken. I, for one, have signed up to participate in our local No Kings rally on October 18th. I have a sign in my front yard supporting Abigail Spanberger, the Democratic candidate for governor of Virginia in the November 2025 election. There are consistently smaller rallies that are taking place across the country that individuals like you and me can participate in. That's one way. We can continue to speak out. Now, you and I happen to be writers, and we are speaking out almost daily in opposition to these unconstitutional and unlawful actions. But others who may not be writing as much as we do can write letters to the editors. They can seek to publish op-ed pieces in their local papers. That's one way they can resist on an individual level. Another way is to participate in local government. Go to meetings. Be part of local conversations. Go to the library and show support for those who oppose book banning. There are a number of different ways individuals like you, me, and everybody who is listening to this can act assertively to resist the authoritarian actions of Trump, his administration, and those who follow him at state and local levels.
What are
Those are some ways.
sorry. What are your thoughts about the potential efficacy of boycotts?
Well, I think you captured this extremely well in the column that you wrote and published. I believe it was yesterday. And that is that uh, the public has vast economic power, and it can exercise that power in ways that show resistance to what's happening in Washington. One way is to boycott chains that have shown support for Trump and his policies and to shop at local family owned stores. Another way is to make donations to organizations such as the American Civil Liberties Union, which is very actively opposing many of the things Trump and his acolytes are doing. How do you think that the populace could use its economic resources to resist what Trump and his administration are doing?
My thoughts are that one way to do it would be to boycott the businesses that Trump has co-opted, that have become a part of the Trump firmament. I won't name names because, I don't think we want to be sued. But at the end of the day, I think there are some large companies in this country that are collecting quite a bit of money, and they're doing it from consumers. And consumers have the power, as you just indicated, to make good on their promise to hold people accountable. The other way is corollary to that is to support local businesses. Put your money where the locals are. Help out companies that are struggling, that are not doing as well as they used to since the big box stores showed up and the major online retailers showed up. A lot of those companies are Trump sympathizers, and I think that if you support small companies that are making products and that have the public interest at heart, you can do a good turn for them, and you can also do a good turn for the country. Each individual act has a consequence. I think that there's no way that any individual can make that big a difference. But if all of us do this sort of a thing, it will make a difference.
Well, that's my view. If the lower courts, particularly, keep acting honestly and courageously, if, as a result of the 2026 elections, which unfortunately are a year off, uh, the House and perhaps even the Senate can be turned around to be democratically controlled. And if, as you and I have just discussed, individuals uh, assert their right to resist in economic as well as in non economic ways, these three modes of resistance together are, in my opinion, going to substantially impair Trump's authoritarian efforts. You see, Mark, the way I look at it is this. In a way, Trump is doing what Hitler did. Now, I'm not saying Trump is comparable to Hitler. I want to make that clear. In my view, nobody is comparable to Hitler. But what Hitler was doing in the 30s and even the 40s is he kept grabbing off territory, one after another, until finally the Allies stopped him from doing that. Like all authoritarians, like Hitler, like Mussolini, like Ceausescu, like Stalin, like Gaddafi, Trump is grabbing off territory by violating the Constitution and other laws. And as an authoritarian, Mark, he's going to continue to do that
Until he's stopped.
until he's stopped. Now, he's been partially stopped by the courts, certainly not the way you and I would like to see it. He has not been stopped by Congress, and the public is starting to coalesce. We're not there yet. Starting to coalesce to oppose what it is that's going on. And it may be that the No Kings rallies across the country on October 18th will be galvanizing events that will propel those of us who are opposing the authoritarianism to become even more active.
You know, I want to kind of pick up a thread that we've both kind of mentioned during the course of this conversation so far, and that's the Supreme Court. My view on the court is that something has to be done about it, but it's not going to be done until a Democrat controls the White House and Democrats control Congress. And I think at that point, the court has to be job number one for that Congress and for that executive. What I propose should happen should be a code of ethics for starters, but more important than that, term limits, retroactive, that would cover every single member of the court, wipe out the court completely, appoint 13 new justices, one for each district. And if that turns out to be the result, that the Democrats are appointing all the justices, well, then I think we can trust Democrats to appoint people who are reasonable jurists and who will do the right thing, not partisan hacks who will do the wrong thing and who will follow the lead of a president that has no ethics or morals. I'd like to believe that that will happen. But if we have a court like that, we stand a good chance of overturning a lot of the precedent that's been set by this court and that's been in turn overturned by this court, and resetting the balance a little bit and creating an environment whereby we're a nation of laws again, rather than a completely upset system of checks and balances that doesn't work. What are your thoughts?
Well, I suppose I'm more of a traditionalist than you are when it comes to the issue of the Supreme Court. Now, that may be because I spent 5 decades practicing law in federal courts across the country. After I graduated from law school, I clerked for a outstanding federal court judge, and I was a member of the Supreme Court bar for over 40 years. I've thought about proposals like yours, uh, and I believe, number one, they're not doable. And number two, I still reluctantly and even questioning myself continue to support a 9-member court and that justices be nominated and confirmed as we have in the past. I just read an article yesterday that suggested perhaps in the next year or two, Justice Alito, who I know because we clerked for the same judge, that Justice Alito may be retiring. I don't know if he will or he won't, but that is certainly going to create a major fracas in Congress concerning a successor justice. So I think we're stuck with 6-3 for some period of time.
I follow you, and I was a traditionalist at one point. I just don't believe that we can afford a court like this one for time immemorial. I don't believe the number 9. Well, I know the number 9 is not set in stone. We know that. But as a traditionalist, I can see why you'd like the number 9 simply because it's been what we've had for so long.
It's a tradition.
It's a tradition. I'm starting to believe that we need to start upending traditions, and we need to start upending them definitively. So I'm going to stick with my side of the story. I really believe that we need to upend this court, and we need to do it in a dramatic fashion because it's just not working the way it is right now. We're not attracting the proper people. And when the Republicans are in power, we have a nihilistic party that's bent on putting in ideologues that will shape American society for decades to come. And if we allow them to keep doing it, it will become irreversible. So from my perspective, a revolution's needed. And so that's why I think that way. All of that said, I respect your point because I used to feel the same way.
Well, I will tell you this. I am extremely sympathetic to everything that you've just said. And maybe next month I'll come over to your point of view.
Let's wait and see.
I would before our next podcast.
We may know a lot before our next podcast. They've just started their new term.
Yes.
So another question I wanted to ask is about this retribution campaign at the Department of Justice. We've already seen James Comey indicted, proving that a ham sandwich can be indicted. The old adage is true, as a matter of fact. But now we're talking about investigating Obama, Biden, Letitia James, John Bolton, a host of others. How do you stop this?
That's a great question, which I've thought about. Let me just give a tiny bit of history. Watergate was a disaster for the Department of Justice. Nixon was controlling the Department of Justice to do his political bidding. And it ended up, among other things, with Nixon resigning, the Attorney General John Mitchell going to jail, and other Confederates of theirs also being indicted and convicted. Following that, Gerald Ford appointed Edward Levy, who had been a dean of the University of Chicago Law School, to come in and clean house. And Levy instituted a set of well thought out reforms that have persisted until Trump was elected president, even the first time. And perhaps the most important of those reforms is that the Department of Justice is to be independent of the White House. The White House is not to interfere with any of the Department of Justice's business. Well, that norm, which was part of Edward Levy's system of norms, has been violated over and over again as Trump uses the DOJ for his own retribution, punishing those he perceives to be enemies, including the ones that you mentioned. How do you stop it? Well, I think that it may be the only way to stop it is for Congress somehow to exercise power to intervene, to change personnel, to impeach Pam Bondi, to impeach Kash Patel. Those are ways to bring the Department of Justice back to where it should be as an independent protector of the Constitution. But as I said before, when you have, 218 GOP acolytes, sycophants, what I just prescribed as a way to correct it is not going to happen.
You hear that, Democrats? Vote.
Yeah, that's exactly right. As you and I have said in some of our writings, the November 2026 election can determine whether democracy is going to prevail.
I think you're right. Let's talk about the redistricting mess. You've got Texas, Missouri, Ohio, Indiana, Utah, Florida, and who knows who all else are planning mid-decade redistricting, which is a no-no. What do you do to stop it, aside from going to court?
Well, I would say go to court. But you said, Mark, don't talk to me about that.
No, I think you got to go to court. I agree with you. I just don't know what the Supreme Court will do.
And, that gets back to my faith, though perhaps it's unfounded, at least in the trial and intermediate appellate courts in the federal system. I think that another way to deal with the redistricting wrongs that are taking place is to galvanize people at a local level, to get them to put pressure on their state legislators and governors to resist the effort at redistricting that the GOP is uh, implementing in those states you mentioned and perhaps others in order to increase the GOP's ability to continue to control the House and the Senate. Uh, Again, the courts, the legislatures, and the people.
I want to talk about the lower courts for a minute because I think they're important. They're ruling pretty consistently against Trump. I think we're seeing a pattern of courts around the country ruling against Trump. Most recently, the court in Oregon that ruled that he can't invest Portland with federal office.
Right. Trump appointed judge.
Exactly.
Remember that.
Judge Immergut. So what I'm starting to see is an incipient pissing match between the lower courts and the Supreme Court. There's starting to be a real effort on the part of the lower courts to call out the Supreme Court for overruling their judgments one after the other after the other. At what point does this become an embarrassment for the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that the new term, which began this week,
yesterday,
is going to be a bell. Yeah, is going. That's right. Today is going to be a bellwether, because on the court's docket are cases where it has issued temporary injunctions and restraining orders as part of its shadow docket practice. Yes. In fact, I've written an article, I think that'll be published next month, about the use of the shadow docket. But many of those shadow docket cases are going to now be before a full Supreme Court, where they're going to have briefs submitted by the parties, where they're going to hear oral argument, and where they're going to have to actually sit down and write opinions that will be circulated among all the justices before those opinions are published. It'll be interesting to see whether in those cases, like, the immigrant, the ICE cases, whether the Supreme Court, when it's a full hearing with briefing and oral argument, is going to reach a different conclusion than what appears to have been reached in a shadow docket ruling.
I'm writing a piece as well about the next term of the court, and the shadow docket features not nearly as prominently as your shadow docket piece does, but I'm going to presage probably a few of your arguments in it. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the shutdown. We're now in the first week. We're done with the first week of it, and the pain is already being felt by people who aren't going to get their paychecks next time around on the 15th. Who's going to get the blame for this? Who do you think is going to get the blame for it? Do you think the Republicans are going to end up eating this one, or are the Democrats going to be blamed?
One of the observations that I've made over several decades is that the Republicans are extremely skilled in their messaging, and the Democrats have been very unskilled in their messaging. Now, hopefully that's changing. I've read some of the polls over the weekend where the people so far are blaming Trump and the Republicans for the shutdown. I am hopeful that Democrats, like, for example, Chris Murphy, somebody who, by the way, I think ought to run for president.
I agree with you.
Nobody else said that, but I am a big fan of Chris Murphy. He has spoken out vociferously against the Republicans for the shutdown, and other Democrats, even in addition to AOC and Bernie Sanders, are speaking out as well. I am hoping that the Democrats will organize their messaging and become much more vocal about it so that the blame is appropriately cast upon the Republicans. I'd like to tell you I'm confident that will happen, but I'm not confident it will happen based on the histories that I described of the Republicans' magnificent messaging and the Democrats searching for messages.
I've been watching and listening to what the leadership has been saying the past few days, and I have to say that Jeffries is sounding a lot more militant than Schumer is, which concerns me because Schumer holds the key to all of this. If he decides to cave, then it's over. Now, I've got a take on that, and it's a miserable take, because if the Republicans get what they want, they're going to pay for it, along with all of the Americans who are going to suffer. Because I think that once the consequences are realized, people are going to be furious. I don't want that to happen. I would rather we win this fight and maintain the subsidies, and so people don't suffer. But the Republicans are in a lose-lose situation, because if they win this battle, people are going to suffer and they're going to be blamed. If they lose this battle, they're going to be seen to have lost. And that's a tough situation for them to be in. I'd like to see us win this battle simply so people don't lose their subsidies. But I think at the end of the day, the Democrats need to learn how to message. And I wrote a piece about this the other day, how we need to take a page out of the New Cambridge playbook and start getting really harsh. Because the Republicans need to be defined in the terms that are consistent. Norm Ornstein, the scholar, who has written about Congress for years and years and years, has basically said that there is one party only that is responsible for the dysfunction in Congress, and that is the Republican Party. And I think that the Democrats need to define them as such and say, this is not a both sides thing. Enough of both sides of the mirror, enough media with Congress isn't doing its job. The Republican Congress isn't doing its job. And I think as soon as we do that, the people are going to start to look at it and say, wait a minute, these people really are troublemakers. They're inhibiting the public good, and they're causing us untold harm. And I think the Democrats have to message in a way that gets that across. And they have to repeat it again and again and again, because repetition is the mother of success.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's beyond disgraceful that with the government shutdown and people beginning to suffer, that the president is playing golf, and that Mike Johnson told Congress to go home. You don't have to work while this is going on. And by the way, you're going to continue to be paid. I find the whole thing to be so upsetting. My daughter-in-law is a federal worker. She works in a Social Security office in New Jersey. She is working without pay. She is concerned about how her family is going to pay its bills. She said the morale within her office is the lowest she's ever seen it, and it seems to be sinking further. People are afraid. Fear is inhabiting the Social Security offices around the country. And that's only one example. There are many examples, I'm sure, that exist where the same thing is happening. And I'd like to say one more thing. I wrote a little bit about it today. You may not have seen it. And that is, with everything that's going on, Mark, with the shutdown, with the actions of ICE, for example, in Chicago, with sending troops to Portland from California, which fortunately was enjoined last night, and so on. Epstein is no longer on the front page. And I am slowly coming to the conclusion that the reason why the Republicans are digging in their heels and doing everything they can to prevent the Epstein files from being disclosed is because some of them know what's in those files about Trump. And if those files are disclosed, it will be Trump's bet noir. It will be the cause of his downfall. Now, maybe that's just hopeful thinking on my part, but I think there is a real possibility that if he's found to have had sexual relations with minors, that he's done. Enough of his own party will turn on him that it's conceivable he would be impeached.
I have said again and again and again that nothing can undo Trump but Trump. And this may be Trump's undoing, his own actions. We'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, Mike Johnson is making sure that vote doesn't happen by refusing to seat Congresswoman-elect Grijalva. This is outrageous, but nothing can be done to stop him because the Speaker is God in the House. And we learned that from Nancy Pelosi's term as Speaker. The Speaker can do what he or she wants, and he can continue to not seat her for a long time. And as long as he doesn't seat her, the votes aren't there to release the Epstein files. Now, what the Democrats need to do is to make clear that he's refusing to seat a duly elected member of Congress because he's afraid that member will vote to release the Epstein files. And why? Because he's terrified of what's in those files. And I think that needs to be made clear. They've taken the Epstein files off the front page. They need to be put back on the front page.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there are some Democrats who have spoken about it, Ro Khanna being one of many, but not enough. And it's easy to get distracted from Epstein because the Trump administration is flooding the zone with unconstitutional and unlawful actions. But those of us who care about honesty, morality, legality, need to continue to focus on the Epstein files as well, and the GOP's conspiracy to conceal those files from the public.
That's exactly right. And I think I want to go back to something you said before, just off topic for a second. You talked about the morale at your daughter-in-law's agency. This is exactly what the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vaughn, who was one of the architects of Project 2025, wants. He said overtly, he said straight out, I want them to be afraid to come to work. I want them so demoralized that they won't come to work anymore. I want them so demoralized that they'll quit. And if they don't quit, we'll fire them. This is what the plan is. This is what Project 2025 says. And I think that we forget about Project 2025 to our peril because everything that's happening right now was in that book. They wrote the playbook for this, and it's happening exactly as they planned. I think I read somewhere that some 65% to 70% of Project 2025 is in some stage of implementation as we speak.
Right. I also read that. And there was a very interesting article, I believe it was yesterday in the Washington Post, about dramatically increasing unemployment in Montgomery County and Fairfax County, the counties where probably hundreds of thousands of government workers live. It's up 35. Unemployment has increased 35% in Montgomery County. I think it's 28% in Fairfax County. Those percentages, if they're not exact, they're close. And it's only going to get worse now because of what you just said. Vaught is out to level the federal workforce. And My daughter-in-law, in fact, said to me she started to look around for other employment because she's fearful of what's going to happen.
Good reason. We're reaching the end. I just wanted to get some final thoughts from you. Anything that we haven't covered, anything that's still on your mind?
Well, I want to return to a thought I shared before about authoritarianism uh, and how authoritarians like Pol Pot, like Hitler, like Mussolini, and you can go back further in history, just keep grabbing off more and more and more by spreading their authoritarian actions. That's what we're seeing. And I believe the three ways to stop that, to the extent that it can be stopped, are through the federal courts. I continue to have confidence in the lower courts. Through Congress, if we can flip the House and maybe the Senate in 2026, and by a whole host of individual actions, which you and I and people who are listening to this podcast can take. I think that's the way in which we can recapture our democracy from what is happening. What are your final comments?
My final thoughts are the thread running through all of this is vote. We have to vote. We can do individual actions. We can rely on the lower courts. But until we vote and vote in overwhelming numbers for Democrats and elect Democrats to the House and to the Senate and create a new dynamic in Washington whereby Trump is being held accountable again, like he was at some point during the first term, then we're going to continue to suffer under this tyranny that we're living through right now. So, folks, get out and vote. Those of you who are voting in New Jersey and Virginia next month, and those of you who are voting around the rest of the country next year, get out and vote. It matters. With that, welcome again to America's Fractured Politics, to another episode. I'll see you next episode. I want to thank Marc Friedman for coming on and sharing his thoughts today. It's been an incredible delight, and I'm looking forward to doing it many times in the future. So with that, thank you, Marc.
Okay, thanks, Mark.